On the unforgiving streets of Manhattan, where compassion often takes a back seat to ambition, an extraordinary story of fate is about to unfold. Michael Foster could tell you the exact model of any car by the sound of its engine, a skill honed from years as a master mechanic before life dealt him an impossible hand. Now, armed with only a weathered toolbox and an unwavering spirit, he spends his days helping stranded motorists, refusing payment from those who can barely afford it. What he doesn't know is that his next repair will change everything. Eleanor Shaw, the reclusive CEO of Shaw Technologies, has spent years hiding behind her wealth, testing the authenticity of everyone who approaches her. But when her beloved vintage Mercedes breaks down in the rain, she's about to discover that sometimes love arrives in the most unexpected package, carrying nothing but a wrench and a genuine heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun hadn't yet touched the tops of Manhattan's gleaming towers when Michael Foster emerged from his makeshift shelter beneath the Roosevelt Bridge. His weathered toolbox, scratched and dented but meticulously organized, caught the pre-dawn light as he carefully checked its contents. Each tool had its place, each wrench and socket a reminder of better days. A few blocks away, Eleanor Shaw stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse suite, watching the city wake up below. Her reflection showed a woman in her early 40s, elegant but tired, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. On her desk, a stack of acquisition proposals waited for her attention, each representing another hollow victory in a game she'd grown weary of playing. Michael's morning routine was precise. Despite his circumstances, he washed up in the public restroom of a nearby park, changed into his cleanest set of clothes, donated by a church shelter, and carefully trimmed his beard. The face that looked back at him from the spotted mirror was weathered but dignified, his eyes clear and focused, despite the hardships that had brought him here. "Another beautiful morning in paradise," he muttered to himself, a hint of irony in his voice as he shouldered his toolbox and began his daily walk. His route took him past familiar landmarks, the coffee shop where Maria, the kind-hearted owner, sometimes slipped him a free cup, the auto parts store where he'd once been manager, the school where he used to drop off his daughter before everything changed. Eleanor's morning was equally ritualistic, but worlds apart. Her personal assistant, Thomas, had already arranged her schedule, lined up her meetings, and prepared her daily brief on market fluctuations. As she sipped her perfectly prepared green tea, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from her carefully ordered life. "Ms. Shaw, the board meeting has been moved to 10 a.m., Thomas announced from the doorway, and Mr. Reynolds called again about the dinner invitation. Eleanor suppressed a sigh. James Reynolds, another billionaire, another carefully orchestrated attempt at matching suitable partners. "Tell him I'm unavailable," she said, not looking away from the window. "And Thomas, cancel the board meeting. I'm taking the Mercedes out today." The vintage one. Thomas couldn't hide his surprise. The 300 SL was Eleanor's prized possession, a reminder of Sunday drives with her father before his empire had grown too large for such simple pleasures. "Shall I have James drive?" "You?" "No," Eleanor said firmly, reaching for the keys she kept in her desk drawer. "Sometimes you have to take the wheel yourself." By mid-morning, Michael had already helped 3 people with their vehicles. A young mother whose minivan wouldn't start got a free jump start and a quick lesson in battery maintenance. An elderly man with a flat tire received not just assistance, but also a thorough check of his other tire's pressure. A teenager in a beaten-up Civic learned why his engine was making that strange clicking sound. "You're an angel," the young mother had said, tears in her eyes as her van rumbled to life. She'd tried to press a $20 bill into his hand, but Michael gently refused. "Keep it for the kids," he'd said, nodding toward the car seats in the back. "Just remember, there's still good in the world when times get tough." Meanwhile, Eleanor sat in her beloved Mercedes, feeling the familiar leather beneath her fingers. The car was more than just a vehicle. It was a time machine that transported her back to simpler days. Days when her father would let her sit on his lap and pretend to steer, his deep laugh filling the cabin as they cruised through Central Park. The engine purred to life, a sound that always made her smile. This car represented everything she loved about machinery: elegance, precision, and purpose, all working in perfect harmony. It was so different from the digital world she inhabited now, where success was measured in microseconds and market shares. As she guided the Mercedes through the city streets, Eleanor felt the familiar weight of eyes upon her. People always stared at the car, at her, at the carefully constructed image of success she projected. But today felt different. Today she wasn't driving to impress anyone or maintain appearances. Today she was driving to remember who she used to be. The morning wore on, and Michael found himself near the auto parts store where he'd once worked. Through the window he could see his old office, now occupied by someone else. He allowed himself a moment of nostalgia, remembering the satisfaction of running a successful business, of being respected for his knowledge and skill. But life had taught him that respect came in many forms: the grateful smiles of those he helped, the quiet nods from other homeless individuals who knew him as the guy who could fix anything. These meant more than any corporate title ever had. A light drizzle began to fall, and Michael took shelter under a store awning. He watched the clouds gathering overhead, promising a serious summer storm. Around him, the city's pace quickened as people hurried to escape the coming rain. In her Mercedes, Eleanor felt a freedom she rarely experienced anymore. The leather seat carried the memory of her father's cologne, the wooden steering wheel smooth beneath her hands. As the rain began to fall, she smiled, feeling more alive than she had in months. Then she heard it. A subtle change in the engine's purr, a slight hesitation that would have been imperceptible to most. But Eleanor had grown up around cars, learned at her father's knee. Something wasn't right. And as the rain began to fall, in earnest, she realized that this drive might become more of an adventure than she'd planned. The first real thunderclap shook the city just as Eleanor's Mercedes sputtered and died. She guided it to the curb with practiced ease, though her heart was racing. Not from fear, she knew cars too well for that, but from a strange mix of frustration and something else, something that felt almost like anticipation. She reached into her jacket pocket, fingers brushing against the smooth leather of her wallet, where most people kept AADLA cards or mechanics numbers. Eleanor had neither. Her father had taught her to understand cars, not just drive them, and she'd always handled problems herself. The rain drummed harder on the Mercedes roof as she popped the hood and stepped out, her $1,000 shoes instantly soaked in a puddle. The engine compartment revealed itself like an old friend, but something was different, something wasn't right. From his shelter beneath the auto parts store awning, Michael watched the scene unfold with professional interest. The Mercedes was a thing of beauty, a classic 300 SL that made his fingers itch to touch it, to understand its secrets. But it was the woman who caught his attention. Most people with cars like that would be on their phones by now, summoning help. Instead, she was getting drenched, peering into the engine compartment with genuine comprehension in her eyes. His hand unconsciously went to his coat pocket, where he kept his most precious possession, a worn photograph of happier days. Him, Sarah, and little Emma in front of their house, his shop visible in the background. The photo was creased and faded, but it reminded him daily that life could change in an instant. "Need a hand?" he found himself calling out, already moving toward the car. Old habits died hard, and he couldn't watch someone struggle with an engine, especially in this weather. Eleanor straightened up, rainwater running down her face. Her first instinct was to decline. A lifetime of cautious isolation had taught her to be wary of unexpected help. But there was something in the man's voice, a quiet confidence that spoke of real knowledge. "The timing seems off," she said, testing him, "and there's a knock that shouldn't be there." Michael's eyes lit up at her technical awareness. "Mind, if I take a look, I promise I know my way around these classics." Eleanor hesitated, studying him. His clothes were worn but clean, his bearing dignified despite obvious hardship. The toolbox he carried was old but professional grade, each tool visible through the clear top, arranged with precise care. "I'm Michael," he offered, maintaining a respectful distance. "Eleanor," she replied, surprising herself by using her real name instead of the alias she often gave strangers. "You know these engines? The M198, one of the finest ever made. Inline 6, 215 horsepower, mechanical fuel injection that was years ahead of its time." His voice carried the warmth of genuine appreciation. "May I?" She nodded, stepping aside. Michael moved to the engine with reverent efficiency, his hands hovering over components with practiced familiarity. "Ah," he said after a moment. "Hear that? The fuel pump singing a song it shouldn't." Eleanor leaned in despite herself, their shoulders nearly touching as they both listened to the engine's irregular rhythm. She caught a faint scent of soap, basic but clean, and noticed how steady his hands were despite the cold rain. "The original Bosch pump," she said, realization dawning. "Dad always said it would be the first to go." "Smart man," Michael replied, already reaching for his toolbox. "I can bypass it temporarily, get you somewhere dry. Might take about 20 minutes. In this rain," he smiled, and for a moment, Eleanor saw past the circumstances to the man he must have been before, confident, capable, kind. "I've worked in worse, though I usually charge extra for swimming conditions," he added with a wink that surprised them both. The joke broke something loose in Eleanor's chest, a knot of tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. When was the last time someone had spoken to her so naturally, without agenda or artifice? "There's a coffee shop around the corner," she found herself saying. "I could bring us back something hot while you work, if you don't mind." Michael's hands stilled for just a moment on the engine. He thought of Maria's coffee shop, where he usually watched from outside, and of how different it would be to have someone bring him a cup like a normal transaction between equals. "That would be nice," he said softly, already turning back to the task at hand. "Black, if it's not too much trouble." As Eleanor walked away, Michael pulled out his photograph for a moment, letting the rain splash on its protective plastic covering. "What do you think about that, Emma?" he whispered to the smiling child in the picture. "Your old dad's still got it." The rain continued to fall, but neither of them seemed to notice anymore. Sometimes, Michael reflected as he expertly manipulated the fuel system, the worst weather brought out the best moments, and sometimes a breakdown wasn't really a breakdown at all, but a breakthrough in disguise. The coffee shop's bell chimed as Eleanor pushed through the door, bringing with her a gust of rain-cooled air. The barista looked up, clearly startled by the sight of a drenched woman in designer clothes whose makeup remained somehow impeccable. "2 blacks, please," Eleanor said, then noticed the pastry case. When was the last time she'd eaten something that wasn't prepared by her personal chef? And 2 of those cinnamon rolls. Outside, Michael worked with practiced precision, his movements efficient despite the rain. The Mercedes responded to his touch like an old friend, each component falling into place exactly as he'd expected. This was what he missed most about his old life. Not the money or the status, but this dance with machinery, the satisfaction of making things right. He was so absorbed in his work that he almost didn't notice Eleanor's return. She stood watching him for a moment, 2 steaming cups in her hands, struck by the look of complete focus on his face. "Found the problem?" she asked, holding out his coffee. Michael straightened up, accepting the cup with a grateful nod. "Fuel pump's definitely the culprit. I've rigged a temporary bypass that'll get you home, but you'll want to have it properly. Replaced soon." He paused, then pulled a scrap of newspaper from his pocket, writing carefully on the blank margin. "These are the part numbers you'll need. Make sure they use original Bosch components, not aftermarket." Eleanor took the makeshift, note surprised by his precise handwriting. You couldn't do the replacement. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Michael took a sip of his coffee, good coffee, better than he'd had in months, before answering. "I'm not exactly running a licensed shop these days," he said finally, gesturing to his weathered toolbox. "But I could talk you through what to look for, make sure whoever does it knows their stuff." Eleanor studied him over the rim of her cup. "You obviously know these cars. Were you a mechanic before?" She let the question trail off, unsure how to delicately reference his current circumstances. "Had my own shop," Michael replied, turning. "Back to the engine. Specialized in European classics. Did pretty well too." His hands moved automatically as he spoke, completing the final adjustments. "Life has a way of changing your plans sometimes." He closed the hood with a gentle click, then reached for the cinnamon roll Eleanor had set aside for him. The simple gesture, being handed food as an equal, not as charity, touched something deep inside him. "Try starting it now," he suggested, wiping his hands on a surprisingly clean rag from his toolbox. Eleanor slid behind the wheel, and the engine caught immediately. The sound was different now, smoother, more confident. She smiled despite herself, remembering similar moments with her father. "Perfect," she said, stepping back out into the rain. "What do I owe you?" Michael shook his head. "Consider it a professional courtesy." He began packing his tools away, each one returning to its designated spot. "At least let me pay for your time," Eleanor insisted, reaching for her wallet. "Time's the one thing I've got plenty of these days," Michael said with a slight smile. Then, making a decision, he pulled out another scrap of paper. "But if you need any advice about the repair, or if you run into any other problems." He wrote down a number, not his, but the phone at the shelter where he sometimes stayed. Eleanor took the paper, noting how he'd labeled it simply Michael Mercedes Specialist. No last name, no business title, just a simple statement of expertise. "Thank you," she said, meaning it for more than just the repair. "Not many people would help a stranger in the rain. Not many strangers would trust a guy like me with a car like this," he countered gently. Their eyes met for a moment, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or the recognition of something familiar in someone completely different. The rain was letting up as Eleanor got back into her car. Through the windshield, she watched Michael shoulder his toolbox and begin walking away. He moved with purpose, she noticed, like someone who knew exactly who he was, regardless of circumstances. On an impulse, she rolled down her window. "Michael," he turned back, "do you believe in second chances?" He thought of the photograph in his pocket, of his daughter's smile frozen in time. "I have to," he said simply. Eleanor nodded, then put the car in drive. As she pulled away, she glanced in her rearview mirror. Michael stood watching her go, his toolbox at his feet, the last of the rain creating a curtain of silver light around him. Neither of them could have known it then, but that moment in the rain was about to change both their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness open the largest doors. And sometimes, when you help a stranger fix a broken car, you end up fixing much more than that. That evening, Eleanor sat in her penthouse office, the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. The newspaper scrap with Michael's number lay on her desk, slightly wrinkled from the rain, but still clearly legible. His handwriting was precise, educated, at odds with his current circumstances. "Miss Shaw," Thomas appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. "I have that information you requested." She nodded, not looking away from the window. "Tell me." Michael Foster, former owner of Foster's European Auto, one of the most respected restoration shops in the tri-state area. The business closed 3 years ago following... Thomas hesitated. "Following what?" "A family tragedy, ma'am. His daughter, Emma, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. The medical bills..." Thomas scrolled through his tablet. "He sold everything trying to save her. The shop, his house, his retirement fund. But she didn't make it." Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering the gentle way Michael had handled her father's car. The way his eyes had lit up talking about the engine. A man who'd lost everything except his dignity and his skill. "There's more," Thomas continued. "Before the shop, he was actually an engineering graduate from MIT, held several patents for automotive innovations. The shop was almost an afterthought. He opened it because he loved working with classic cars." Outside her window, the rain had started again, softer now. Eleanor thought about how many rainy nights Michael must have endured since losing everything. How many people had walked past him, never knowing they were ignoring one of the finest mechanical minds in the city. Across town, in the quiet of the shelter's computer room, Michael sat staring at his own discovery. The web page displayed a Forbes article. Eleanor Shaw, the reclusive genius behind Shaw Technologies. The photo showed his morning client in a different light. Polished, powerful, intimidating in her corporate success. "Should have known," he muttered, scrolling through the article. "That suit probably cost more than my old shop." "Who you reading about?" asked Jerry, the shelter's night manager. "Just someone who needed car help today," Michael replied, closing the browser. But his mind was still processing what he'd read. Eleanor Shaw wasn't just wealthy. She was brilliant, had revolutionized quantum computing, built an empire from her father's modest tech company. And she knew cars, really knew them, not just as status symbols, but as the marvels of engineering. They were. That part at least had been genuine. Back in her penthouse, Eleanor found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She was Googling auto parts, specifically original Bosch fuel pumps for classic Mercedes models. The prices made her wince, not because she couldn't afford them, but because she now understood what such costs meant to people like Michael. Her phone buzzed, another text from James Reynolds, still pursuing that dinner date. She ignored it, focusing instead on the mechanical diagrams on her screen. The same diagrams Michael had understood so intuitively in the rain. "Thomas," she called out, "cancel my meetings tomorrow morning and find out where Foster's European Auto used to be." In the shelter, Michael pulled out his family photo, studying it in the dim light. Emma sat on his shoulders in front of the shop, her smile bright, despite the illness that was just beginning to show. Sarah stood beside them, before the stress and grief had torn them apart. "Made a rich friend today, Princess," he whispered to the photo. "Your old dad's moving up in the world." He managed a small smile, remembering Eleanor's parting question. About second chances. The night shelter manager made his rounds, checking on residents. He paused at Michael's bunk. "Good day today?" "Fixed a nice car," Michael replied, carefully tucking the photo away. Sometimes that's enough. But both Michael and Eleanor lay awake that night, thinking about their encounter. Each now knew who the other really was, but neither could guess how this knowledge would change their lives. In their own ways, both were wrestling with the same question. In a world divided by wealth and circumstance, could genuine connection survive? Eleanor's laptop glowed in the darkness of her bedroom as she researched mechanical engineering patents from 15 years ago. Michael's name appeared again and again, attached to innovations she'd actually used in her own company's manufacturing processes. In the shelter, Michael remembered the way Eleanor's eyes had lit up when he'd explained the engine problem, the same way Emma's had when he'd taught her about cars. Some connections, he realized, transcended social barriers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, but for now, both of them had glimpsed something rare in the other. Authenticity in a world of facades, and sometimes that's enough to build on. The next morning, Eleanor stood in front of what used to be Foster's European Auto. The building now housed a trendy coffee shop, all exposed brick and artisanal brews. Nothing remained of the auto shop except a faded outline where the sign had once hung. "The property records, Miss Shaw," Thomas said, handing her a folder, "and the business plan you requested." She nodded, studying the documents. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Shaw Technologies needed a new head of mechanical engineering for their autonomous vehicle division. The position required someone with both theoretical knowledge and hands-on experience. Someone exactly like Michael Foster. "Have legal draw up the paperwork," she instructed, "and find out which shelter he's staying at." "Ms. Shaw," Thomas hesitated, "the board will have questions. His current situation. The board will see his patents, his mighty credentials, and his track record of innovation," Eleanor cut in. "Nothing else is relevant." But as her car pulled away from the curb, Eleanor wondered if she was being naive. She'd spent her career making ruthlessly practical decisions. Why did this one feel so different? At the shelter, Michael was already awake, organizing his toolbox for the day. Each morning he removed every tool, cleaned it, and returned it to its proper place. The ritual helped him remember who he was, not just what he'd become. "Got a visitor?" Jerry announced, appearing at his bunk. "Some corporate type. Says she's from Shaw Technologies." Michael's hands stilled on a socket wrench. "Did she give a name?" "Some VP of HR. Not the boss lady herself." Jerry shrugged. "Want me to tell them you're not interested?" Michael thought about the article he'd read, about Eleanor's empire of innovation. "No," he said finally. "I'll talk to them." The meeting room at the shelter was small but clean. The HR representative, a woman named Janet Chen, wore the kind of professional smile that revealed nothing. "Mr. Foster," she began, "we've been reviewing your background in mechanical engineering and automotive systems. Your patents, in particular, have caught our attention." She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a job offer that made Michael's breath catch. The salary was more than generous. The benefits included comprehensive health insurance, and the position, head of mechanical engineering for autonomous systems, was something he was uniquely qualified for. "Why now?" he asked quietly. "These patents are years old. Shaw Technologies believes in finding the right person, regardless of circumstances." Janet's smile became a fraction more genuine. "We've also heard you do excellent work in the rain." Michael looked up sharply. "Ms. Shaw put you up to this. Ms. Shaw identified your potential, but this offer is based entirely on merit." Janet tapped the folder. "We've been using your drivetrain innovations in our prototypes for years. Having the inventor on our team would be invaluable." Michael opened the folder again, running his fingers over the Shaw Technologies letterhead. He thought about Emma. How proud she'd been of his patents. "I haven't worked in technology for a long time." "But you've never stopped solving problems, have you? Never stopped helping people with their cars, even when—" Janet gestured at their surroundings. "Talent doesn't disappear with circumstance, Mr. Foster." He closed the folder. "Can I think about it?" "Of course." Janet stood, leaving her card on the table. "We'll need an answer by Friday." After she left, Michael sat alone in the meeting room, the job offer before him like a bridge to his past life. Through the window, he could see other shelter residents starting their day, carrying their worldly possessions in bags and carts. He pulled out his family photo, looking at the shop sign visible in the background. Foster's European auto had been his dream, built from scratch. This offer was someone else's dream, someone else's empire. But Emma had always told him his patents could change the world. "You're not just fixing cars, Daddy," she'd say. "You're inventing the future." He was still sitting there when Jerry checked on him an hour later. "Good news?" the shelter manager asked. Michael looked at the folder, then at his weathered toolbox in the corner. "Could be. Just not sure I deserve it." "Deserve?" Jerry snorted. "Man, I've watched you fix cars in the rain, help people who couldn't pay you, treat every broken-down vehicle like it was a Rolls-Royce. You deserve plenty. Question is, are you ready to believe that?" The answer didn't come that day. Or the next. Michael kept doing what he'd been doing, helping people with their cars, living day to day. But now there was a folder in his toolbox, growing slightly worn at the edges as he took it out each night to study it. Eleanor, meanwhile, had her own doubts. She'd moved through her week of meetings and decisions, but her mind kept returning to the job offer she'd engineered. "The board approved the position," Thomas reported. though there were questions about the salary. "The salary is non-negotiable," Eleanor replied, staring out at the city. Somewhere out there, a brilliant engineer was helping strangers with their cars, carrying his dignity in a toolbox. "Has he responded?" "Not yet, Ms. Shaw." She nodded, unsurprised. Pride was a complicated thing. She understood that better than most. The deadline approached, and both Michael and Eleanor found themselves counting the days, each wondering if they'd made the right choice. He in considering the offer, she in making it. Sometimes the hardest part of a second chance isn't offering it or accepting it, but believing you're worthy of it in the first place. Friday morning arrived with a clarity that only life-changing decisions bring. Michael stood before the mirror in the shelter's bathroom, wearing a suit provided by a local charity. It fit well enough, though it couldn't quite hide the years of hardship etched into his bearing. His reflection showed a man caught between worlds. The dignified engineer he once was emerging from the shell of survival he'd built around himself. "Looking sharp," Jerry commented, appearing in the doorway. "Made your decision?" Michael adjusted his tie, his fingers remembering the motion from another life. "Emma always said my patents could change the world." He picked up his toolbox, as much a part of him as his own hands. Maybe it's time to find out if she was right. The Shaw Technologies building rose like a crystal spire above the city, its windows reflecting the morning sun. Michael stood at its base, toolbox in one, hand acceptance letter in the other. Security watched him carefully until they saw the visitor badge Janet Chen had arranged. "Mr. Foster," she greeted him in the lobby, her smile genuine this time. "Welcome to Shaw Technologies." The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt like ascending into another world. Each floor they passed represented another layer of corporate success, another level removed from the streets where he'd spent the last 3 years. "The team is excited to meet you," Janet said as they walked through an open office space. "Your drivetrain innovations are legendary in the department." Michael nodded, fighting the surreal feeling. Engineers looked up from their desks as he passed, some recognizing him from his patent photos, others simply curious about the new department head who carried a weathered toolbox instead of a laptop. His office, and the word alone made his heart skip, overlooked the city. From this height he could see the corner where he'd helped Eleanor with her Mercedes, now tiny and distant. On the desk sat a state-of-the-art computer, a security badge, and a small sign, "Michael Foster, Head of Mechanical Engineering." "The team meeting starts in an hour," Janet informed him. "Would you like some time to settle in?" Michael set his toolbox down carefully beside the desk. "Yes, thank you." Alone in the office, he opened his toolbox one last time. Each tool lay in its familiar place, testament to years of careful maintenance. Beneath them, protected in its plastic sleeve, was the family photo. He propped it on his desk, Emma's smile now facing the city she'd loved. The door opened quietly, and Eleanor Shaw stood there, impeccable in a designer suit that probably cost more than his old shop's monthly revenue. "I hope the office is suitable," she said, stepping inside. Michael turned from the window. "You didn't have to do this." "I didn't do anything except recognize talent." She moved to examine his toolbox. "The position needed filling. You were the best candidate. Is that really all this is?" Eleanor met his gaze. "Does it matter? You earned this, Mr. Foster. Your patents, your innovations, they were brilliant 15 years ago and they're brilliant now. The world just took a detour in recognizing it." Before Michael could respond, a young engineer appeared at the door, tablets and papers clutched to his chest. "Mr. Foster, the team's ready for the prototype review whenever you are." Michael straightened, professional instincts rising to the surface. "I'll be right there." He reached for his toolbox. "The lab has all the latest equipment," the engineer said quickly. "Sometimes the old tools are the best ones," Michael replied, lifting the familiar weight. "They remind us where we started." As he followed the engineer out, Eleanor called after him. "Mr. Foster?" He turned. "Sometimes a broken car is just a broken car, and sometimes—" She smiled slightly. Sometimes it's the universe's way of putting things right again. The team meeting room was filled with eager faces, screens displaying complex mechanical diagrams. Michael set his toolbox on the table, opened it with practiced care, and pulled out a wrench that had helped countless stranded motorists. "Before we talk about autonomous systems," he said, holding up the tool, "let's discuss the basics, because sometimes the future depends on understanding exactly where we've been." The engineers leaned forward, and Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The pure joy of sharing knowledge, of building something larger than himself. In his mind, he heard Emma's voice. "You're not just fixing cars, Daddy. You're inventing the future." As he began to speak, Michael realized that maybe she had been right all along. Sometimes the road back to who you're meant to be takes unexpected turns. And sometimes the most important thing you fix isn't a car at all. It's your own place in the world. 2 weeks into his new role, Michael found himself in the company's vast engineering lab, surrounded by the latest automotive testing equipment. But it was his old toolbox, open on the workbench, that drew curious glances from the younger engineers. "That's not in the manual," said David Chen, one of the junior engineers, watching Michael diagnose a problem in their latest prototype using nothing but a socket wrench, and his ear pressed to the housing. "Sometimes the machine tells you what's wrong," Michael replied, "if you know how to listen." He straightened up, selecting another tool from his box. "Your sensors are showing a misalignment, but what they're not telling you is why." The team gathered closer as Michael began to disassemble the component. His movements were precise, each tool selection deliberate. It reminded him of teaching Emma about cars, breaking down complex systems into understandable pieces. "See this wear pattern?" He pointed to a barely visible mark. "Your theoretical models missed this because they assumed perfect conditions, but in the real world, nothing's perfect." From her office above the lab, Eleanor watched the scene unfold through the glass walls. Michael had gathered quite a following among the younger engineers, she noticed. They were drawn not just to his expertise, but to his practical wisdom, something no amount of computer modeling could replace. "Ms. Shaw," Thomas appeared with her afternoon schedule, "the board is asking about the autonomous vehicle project's timeline." "Tell them to come down to the lab," Eleanor said, still watching Michael work. "Some things need to be seen firsthand." Later that afternoon, Michael was reviewing his old patent documents when a notification popped up on his computer. Someone in the legal department had accessed his file, specifically the section about his previous business and its closure. His hands stilled on the keyboard. "The past had a way of following you, even into second chances." He pulled out his family photo, studying Emma's face. "What would you make of all this, Princess?" he whispered. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Eleanor stood there, holding a familiar-looking folder. "Your patent for adaptive suspension systems," she said, walking in. "We've been trying to solve the same problem you cracked 15 years ago." Michael set the photo down carefully. "Things were simpler then. Mechanical solutions for mechanical problems." "But that's just it." Eleanor spread the patents across his desk. "Your solutions weren't just mechanical. They were elegant. You understood that technology should adapt to human needs, not the other way around." She paused, noticing the family. "Photo." Her expression softened. "She must have been very proud of you. She thought I could change the world," Michael said quietly. "Even at the end, when I couldn't even—" He stopped, the memory still too painful. Eleanor moved to the window, giving him a moment to compose himself. Below, the city stretched out, countless cars moving like blood through veins, each one carrying stories, dreams, heartbreaks. "You know," she said, "when my father started this company, it was just him in a garage, fixing computers for neighbors. Everyone told him he was wasting his time, that the future was in software, not hardware." She turned back to Michael. "But he understood something fundamental. Everything. Digital still needs a physical form. Every virtual solution still has to work in the real world. Michael picked up one of his old patents, the paper yellowed with age. Your father sounds like a wise man. He would have liked you, Eleanor said softly. Then, more briskly, the board is coming down to see the lab tomorrow. They want to understand why I chose you for this position. Michael heard the unspoken concern. You're worried they'll focus on where I've been, not what I can do. They're business people. They understand numbers, projections, risk assessments. Then let's show them something they can understand. Michael reached for his toolbox. Your autonomous system's efficiency ratings, they're good, but they could be better. I've been working on something. He pulled out a notebook filled with hand-drawn diagrams. Eleanor leaned closer, her shoulder nearly touching his as she studied the designs. The proximity should have felt uncomfortable, given their different positions, but somehow it didn't. This is brilliant, she breathed, tracing a particularly elegant solution. When did you develop this? Would you believe me if I said some of it came to me while fixing cars in the rain? He smiled slightly. You have a lot of time to think when you're living on the streets, and problems don't stop needing solutions just because you've lost everything. Their eyes met, and in that moment something shifted between them. Eleanor saw not just the brilliant engineer or the man she'd met in the rain, but someone who understood that innovation wasn't just about technology. It was about making life better for real people. The board meets at 10, she said, straightening up. Show them this, Michael. Show them who you really are. After she left, Michael looked again at Emma's photo. Change the world, huh? He picked up his notebook, filled with designs sketched during long nights at the shelter. Maybe we still can, Princess. Maybe we still can. The board meeting had gone better than anyone expected. Michael's designs had spoken for themselves, and even the most skeptical board members couldn't deny the potential impact on their autonomous vehicle program. But it was what happened after. The meeting that would change everything. Eleanor found Michael in the lab that evening, long after most employees had gone home. He sat at his workbench, surrounded by scattered papers, not patents or designs this time, but medical bills. Years of them. I thought I might find you here, she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Michael didn't look up. Cleaning out my old toolbox, found these stuffed in the bottom. His voice was distant, lost in memory. $3 million. That's what it cost to try to save her. Every treatment, every specialist, every experimental procedure. Eleanor pulled up a stool beside him, close enough to see the dates on the bills. The amounts were staggering, each one a desperate attempt to buy more time. She was 12, Michael continued, finally looking up. Just 12 when we found out. The doctors said she had maybe 6 months. We got her 2 years. His hands trembled slightly as he gathered the papers. Cost me everything I had, everything I was. And in the end, it still wasn't enough. Eleanor finished quietly. Michael looked at her sharply, seeing something in her expression he hadn't noticed before. My mother, Eleanor explained, her own voice thick with memory. Pancreatic cancer. I was 24, just taken over the company from my father. We had all the money in the world, the best doctors, the newest treatments. But sometimes love and money aren't enough. Michael completed her thought. They sat in silence for a moment, two people who understood that some losses reshape your entire world. After she died, Eleanor continued, I threw myself into the company, built it into something huge, but I never... She paused, choosing her words carefully. I never let anyone close enough to see past the success. It was easier to be the untouchable CEO than to risk caring that much again. Michael nodded, understanding completely. After Emma, my wife couldn't handle it. The empty house, the memories. She left 6 months later. I don't blame her. Grief does strange things to people. Is that why you started helping strangers with their cars? Even after losing everything? Emma used to love watching me work. Michael smiled faintly. She'd sit in the shop for hours, asking questions about every tool, every repair. Said I wasn't just fixing cars, I was helping people get home to their families. He gestured at the medical bills. When I lost the shop, lost everything. Helping people was all I had left of her. Eleanor reached out impulsively, covering, his hand with hers. The contact surprised them both, but neither pulled away. The morning we met, she said, I was driving my father's car because I needed to feel close to him. He died last year, heart attack in his sleep. The papers called it the end of an era, talked about stock prices and company succession. Nobody mentioned how he taught me to change spark plugs, or how he'd whistle old Beatles songs while we worked on that car. That's why you knew about the fuel pump, Michael realized. You weren't just showing off technical knowledge. Dad always said you could tell everything about a person by how they treated machines, not just their money or status, but their character. She squeezed his hand gently. He would have recognized what I saw in the rain that day. Michael turned his hand over, clasping hers. The gesture was tentative but deliberate. And what was that? Someone who hadn't lost himself, even when he'd lost everything else. Eleanor met his eyes. Do you know how rare that is in my world, to meet someone genuine, someone who helps others without agenda or expectation? The lab's automatic lights dimmed, sensing the lateness of the hour. In the softer light, the barriers between CEO and employee, between their different worlds, seemed to fade. I should go, Michael said finally, but made no move to leave. The shelter has curfew. You're still staying there? Eleanor's surprise was evident. First paycheck comes next week, he shrugged. Besides, I've been helping some of the guys with basic car maintenance, teaching them skills they can use. Eleanor stood, decision made. Come with me. I have something to show you. She led him to the executive parking level, to her father's Mercedes, the same car that had brought them together. Dad believed every problem had a solution, she said, running her hand along the car's pristine hood. Every broken thing could be fixed if you were willing to put in the work. She turned to face Michael. The company keeps apartments for visiting executives. Clean, furnished, close to the office. You should take one. Eleanor, he began to protest. Not charity, she cut him off. You're head of mechanical engineering. Having our top engineer sleep in a shelter doesn't make business sense. Her tone was professional, but her eyes held something warmer. Consider it an investment in the future. Michael looked at the Mercedes, remembering that rainy morning that felt like a lifetime ago. Your father was right, he said finally. About broken things, about putting in the work. He turned to Eleanor. But sometimes what gets fixed isn't what you originally set out to repair. In the quiet of the parking garage, surrounded by the machines they both understood so well, two people who had learned to guard their hearts found themselves wondering if some risks were worth taking. If sometimes the hardest parts to fix were the ones you couldn't see, the ones that only healed when you were brave enough to let someone else help with the repair. The executive apartment was modest by Shaw Technologies standards, but felt like a palace to Michael. A real bed, a kitchen, windows that looked out over the city rather than into it. Still, old habits died hard. He kept his toolbox by the door, ready to grab at a moment's notice. The morning meeting was already underway when James Reynolds strode into the conference room. As head of the board's executive committee, he made it his business to know everything happening in the company, especially things concerning Eleanor. Shaw, I hope I'm not interrupting, he said smoothly, taking a seat opposite Michael. Please continue with your presentation. Michael kept his voice steady as he explained the modifications to the autonomous driving system. But he could feel Reynolds watching him, evaluating not his ideas, but his presence. The way his off-the-rack suit stood out among the bespoke clothing, how his weathered hands betrayed years of manual labor. Fascinating, Reynolds said when Michael finished, though I wonder about the practical experience behind these theories. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. Mr. Foster's practical experience is precisely why his innovations work, James. Not all expertise comes with a corner office. The meeting ended shortly after, but Reynolds lingered. Michael could hear his voice as he packed up his materials. "Eleanor, darling, you can't be serious about this project. The man was living on the streets 2 weeks ago. The man has revolutionized our entire approach to autonomous systems in those 2 weeks, James. The board saw the numbers yesterday. The board sees liability, risk. What happens when the press discovers Shaw Technologies' new department head is a homeless, former MIT graduate, multiple patent holder and successful business owner?" Eleanor interrupted. "Or did you not read his complete file?" Michael slipped out quietly, but the conversation followed him. Throughout the day, he noticed the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. The corporate world had its own pecking order, and he was disrupting it. In the lab, though, none of that mattered. His team of engineers had come to respect his hands-on approach, his ability to bridge the gap between theoretical models and real-world applications. "Mr. Foster?" David Chen approached his workbench. "We've hit a snag with the sensor calibration. The computer models say it should work, but the real world isn't made of ones and zeros," Michael finished, reaching for his toolbox. "Show me." As they worked through the problem, Michael noticed Eleanor watching from the lab's observation window. She wasn't alone. Reynolds stood with her, gesturing emphatically. Even through the soundproof glass, their conversation looked heated. That evening, a memo circulated through upper management. Subject: review of recent hiring practices and security protocols. Michael found it on his desk the next morning, buried under technical specifications, but impossible to ignore. "They're looking for a reason," Thomas said quietly, appearing at Michael's door. Eleanor's usually unflappable assistant looked worried. "Mr. Reynolds has been making calls, asking questions about your time before." Michael nodded, unsurprised. "About the shelter? About everything? The shop closure, the bankruptcy, your wife?" Thomas hesitated. "He's trying to build a case that you're a security risk, that your personal history makes you vulnerable to exploitation." "You mean blackmail?" Michael picked up his family. "Voto, as if I've ever hidden any of it. Miss Shaw is fighting back. She's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." Thomas straightened his tie nervously. "Just be prepared." Michael spent that night in his new apartment, unable to sleep. He laid out every document he had: medical bills, bankruptcy papers, shelter records, his old business licenses. Nothing to hide, but so much that could be twisted, used against him. A text message lit up his phone. "Don't let them win. E." He smiled despite himself. 2 weeks ago, he'd been fixing cars in the rain, carrying everything he owned in a toolbox. Now he was in the middle of corporate warfare, with the CEO herself in his corner. His phone buzzed again. "Meet me in the garage. Bring your tools." The executive parking level was deserted at this hour. Eleanor stood beside her Mercedes, looking more human in jeans and a sweater than her usual corporate armor. "I thought we could use a break from boardrooms," she said, popping the hood. "Want to help me change the fuel pump? For real this time." Michael set down his toolbox, feeling the tension start to ease. Here, among engines and tools, the corporate politics couldn't touch them. Here, they were just two people who understood, both machines and loss, working together to fix what was broken. "You know," he said, selecting a wrench, "in all my years of repairs, I've never had a CEO as my assistant mechanic." Eleanor rolled up her sleeves, a glimmer of her father's daughter showing through. "And I've never had a department head as my personal mechanic. I guess we're both breaking new ground." They worked in comfortable silence, the familiar tasks creating a bubble of peace in the storm of corporate politics. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but for now they had this: the simple truth of mechanical problems and their solutions, of two people finding connection in the most unexpected places. The vintage radio sat on Michael's workbench, its vacuum tubes glowing softly in the lab's evening light. Eleanor perched on a stool beside him, watching as his skilled hands brought the old machine back to life. "Dad had one just like this in his first shop," she said, running her fingers along the radio's wooden case. Used to play Elvis while he worked on computers. Emma loved old radios. Michael carefully adjusted a connection. Said they had more soul than digital. She used to sit in my shop after school, doing homework while I restored them. The lab was quiet at this hour. Most employees long gone. These evening sessions had become their refuge. Moments stolen between corporate battles and board meetings, where they could just be themselves. "Tell me more about her," Eleanor said softly. It wasn't the first time she'd asked, but each story revealed new layers of both father and daughter. Michael's hands stilled on the radio. She wanted to be an engineer. Not cars like her old dad. She was fascinated by renewable energy, had all these plans for solar-powered vehicles. He smiled at the memory. Even when she was sick, she kept designing. Said if she couldn't get better, she'd make sure other kids would have a cleaner world to grow up in. Eleanor reached out, covering his hand with hers. The gesture had become natural over the past weeks, a bridge between their worlds. "The board meeting tomorrow," she said, changing the subject when she felt him tense. "Reynolds has been lobbying hard." "I know." Michael connected the final wire, and suddenly the radio crackled to life. Big band music filled the lab, scratchy but clear. "He's not entirely wrong, you know. A department head who used to sleep under bridges. It's not exactly good PR." "PR?" Eleanor stood, frustrated. "You've transformed our entire autonomous program in a month. The efficiency ratings alone—" "Eleanor," Michael's voice was gentle. "You don't have to defend me. Not here." She turned to face him, really looking at him in the soft evening light. The past month had changed him. New clothes, better food, regular sleep. But his eyes were the same as that rainy morning, clear and direct and honest. "Dance with me," she said suddenly. "What?" "The radio's playing Glenn Miller. Dad used to dance with Mom to this song in their garage." She held out her hand. "Dance with me." Michael hesitated only a moment before taking her hand. They moved together in the open space between workbenches, the music wrapping around them like a cocoon. "I used to dance with Emma at the shop," he said quietly. "She'd stand on my feet and we'd waltz between the cars." "Tell me about the shop." Eleanor's head rested lightly on his shoulder as they swayed. "What was it like?" "Small, compared to this." His hand was warm on her back. "But it was mine. Every tool chosen carefully, every repair done right. Had a little waiting area where customers became friends. Coffee maker always on, birthday cards from their kids on the wall." "Sounds perfect." It was. They turned slowly, lab equipment and corporate logos fading into the background. "But you know what I miss most? The trust. People would leave their cars, their keys, their stories with me. Rich, poor, didn't matter. In my shop, everyone got the same care." Eleanor lifted her head to look at him. "Like that morning in the rain? When a stranger trusted you with her father's car. That stranger turned out to be a pretty good mechanic's assistant." Michael smiled. Then, more seriously, and more than that, the music shifted to something slower, more intimate. Their dancing slowed with it, becoming little more than a gentle sway. "Michael," Eleanor began, then stopped as the lab door opened. Thomas stood in the doorway, his expression apologetic but urgent. "Ms. Shaw, the board's preliminary votes are in. Mr. Reynolds has called an emergency session for first thing tomorrow." The spell broke. Eleanor stepped back, corporate armor sliding back into place, but her hand lingered on Michael's arm. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said quietly, "this is real. What we've built here in the lab with the team between us, it's real." Michael nodded, understanding all she wasn't saying. "Real things last," he replied, "even when the world tries to break them." The radio played on as Eleanor left with Thomas, its vintage warmth filling the lab with memories of simpler times. Michael sat back at his workbench, but his hands remained still on the tools. In the glass walls, he could see his reflection, no longer the homeless mechanic, not quite the corporate executive. Something in between, something new, something real. He pulled out his family photo, propping it against the radio. "What do you think, Emma? Your old dad dancing with the CEO?" He could almost hear her laugh, see her eyes light up with approval. The music faded to static, then cleared again. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight had brought something precious, a moment of pure truth between two people who had forgotten how to be anything but their titles. As Michael finally packed up his tools, he noticed Eleanor had forgotten her suit jacket on a chair. The designer label caught the light, but what made him smile was the small grease stain on the sleeve. Sometimes the most telling stories were written in the smallest details. The headline splashed across Michael's tablet screen the next morning: Shaw Technologies, CEO's secret romance with homeless hire. Below it, a grainy photo showed them dancing in the lab, Eleanor's head on his shoulder, the vintage radio visible. In the background, his phone buzzed immediately. "Thomas, Mr. Foster, Miss Shaw needs you in her office, now." The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Every screen in the building seemed to be showing the story, each news outlet adding their own spin. Rags to riches romance. Corporate Cinderella story. Shaw Technologies security breach. Eleanor stood at her window when he entered, her back rigid. Multiple tablets on her desk displayed different news channels, all running the same story. "Reynolds," she said without turning. "He had someone watching the lab." "Eleanor, I'm so—" "Don't." She turned, and her expression surprised him. Instead of anger or worry, he saw determination. "Don't apologize for something that isn't wrong." The door opened again as Thomas hurried in. "The board is demanding an emergency meeting, and Mr. Reynolds is on his way up." "Good," Eleanor said, straightening her jacket. "Let's end this now." "Ms. Shaw," Thomas hesitated. "The stock is already down 3 points. Major shareholders are calling. The PR team suggests the PR team can wait." She looked at Michael. "Unless you want to handle this differently." Before he could answer, James Reynolds burst in, waving a tablet. "Have you lost your mind? Eleanor, a homeless man? Do you have any idea what this does to our reputation?" "Our reputation?" Eleanor's voice was deadly quiet. "Let's talk about reputation, James. Let's talk about how this homeless man has increased our autonomous system's efficiency by 40% in just a month. Let's talk about the 3 new patents he's already filed for Shaw Technologies." "Patents don't matter when the media is turning us into a circus." Reynolds slapped more tabloid headlines onto her desk. "Romance with a vagrant. CEO's street sweetheart." Michael stepped forward. "Mr. Reynolds, you." Reynolds turned on him. "You played this perfectly, didn't you? Get hired. Cozy up to the CEO, probably already planning your golden parachute. Well, I've got news for you. The board will do what's best for this company," Eleanor cut in. "And right now, that's listening to what I have to say." She pressed a button on her desk. "Thomas, call the board meeting. Now." As Thomas hurried out, Eleanor faced Reynolds. "You want to talk about reputation? Fine. Michael Foster holds more patents than our entire R&D department combined. He built a successful business from nothing, lost everything trying to save his daughter, and still spent years helping others when he had nothing himself." She stepped closer to Reynolds. "That's the kind of character I want associated with Shaw Technologies. The shareholders will love the story once they hear it properly." Eleanor smiled, but there was steel behind it. A brilliant engineer who never lost his humanity, helping others even when homeless, now leading our most innovative department. That's not a scandal. "James, that's the American dream." The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Shaw, the board is ready." "Good." She gathered her tablets. "Coming, James? I believe you wanted this meeting." Reynolds looked between them, realizing he might have miscalculated. "This isn't over." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It's just beginning." She turned to Michael, ready to face the firing squad. Michael thought of all the moments that had led here, the rainy morning with the Mercedes, the late nights in the lab, the dance that someone had captured but couldn't possibly understand. "Emma always said everything happens for a reason," he said quietly, "even the hard things." Eleanor's expression softened for just a moment. Then her CEO mask slipped back into place. "Let's go show them why I hired you in the first place." As they walked to the boardroom, screens continued to flash their story. But now, Michael noticed something different. Below the sensational headlines, comments were appearing from people he'd helped during his homeless years, stories of free repairs, of kindness given without expectation, of dignity maintained through service to others. "Look," he said, pointing to one screen. A young mother, he remembered, had posted, "This man fixed my car for free when I couldn't afford repairs. Said to use the money for my kids instead. If that's who Shaw Technologies is hiring, count me as a supporter." More stories were flooding in. The student whose car he'd diagnosed by ear. The elderly couple whose battery he'd replaced in the rain. The teenage girl whose car wouldn't start after a late shift, whom he'd helped while refusing payment. Eleanor read them, her smile growing. "Still think we can't win this?" Michael thought of his toolbox upstairs, of Emma's photo watching, over his workbench, of the vintage radio that had played while they danced. "You know what they say about reputation," he replied as they reached the boardroom doors. "It's not what people say about you that matters. It's what you do when you think no one's watching." Eleanor squeezed his hand quickly before pushing open the doors. "Then let's show them exactly who we are." The board meeting had gone better than expected, but the victory felt hollow to Michael as he sat in his office that evening. More stories had surfaced about people he'd helped, but so had opinions about inappropriate workplace relationships and corporate responsibility. The stock had stabilized, but the whispers hadn't stopped. He pulled up the resignation letter on his computer screen for the 10th time. The words were simple, professional. "I hereby tender my resignation as head of mechanical engineering, effective immediately." His cursor blinked at the end of the sentence, waiting for more explanation. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Thomas stood in the doorway, his usual composure slightly ruffled. "She won't like it," Thomas said, nodding at the screen. "You read minds now? I've worked for Ms. Shaw for 8 years. I know that look." Thomas stepped into the office. "The board may have backed down, but you're still planning to leave, to protect her." Michael saved the draft letter. "The company's reputation will survive." Thomas placed a folder on his desk. "But I'm not sure she will. Not this time." Michael opened the folder. Inside were photos, Eleanor at various corporate events over the years. In each one, she was perfectly poised, professionally flawless, and completely alone. "Before you met," Thomas continued, "she spent every evening in her office. No friends, no social life, just work and more work. The only time I saw her truly smile was when she worked on that old Mercedes." "She has everything," Michael argued. "Success, wealth, respect." "She has a life other people envy," Thomas corrected. "It's not the same as having a life you want to live." He straightened his tie. "But it's your decision. The car is waiting to take her home if you want to tell her in person." Michael found Eleanor in the parking garage, running her hand along the Mercedes hood. She looked up as he approached, and her smile faded when she saw his expression. "Don't," she said before he could speak. "Eleanor, I know that look. I've seen it before every time someone decided to leave for my own good." She turned to face him fully. "The board backed down. The stock recovered. Why are you still carrying that resignation letter in your pocket?" Michael pulled out the envelope, unsurprised she'd known about it. "Your father built this company from nothing. You've made it into something extraordinary. I can't be the reason it all comes crashing down." "You think my father built this company by caring what people thought?" He hired ex-convicts as programmers because they were the best hackers, gave jobs to high school dropouts because they understood computers better than college graduates. She stepped closer. "He believed in looking past labels to see what people could really do. This is different." "Why? Because feelings are involved?" Eleanor's voice sharpened. "You know what my father told me before he died. He said his biggest regret was letting the company become more important than the people in it, including my mother." She took the envelope from his hands, tore it in half. "I've spent my whole life being what other people expected. The perfect CEO, the untouchable Ms. Shaw. And then one rainy morning, a man with a toolbox reminded me that sometimes the most valuable things can't be measured in stock prices. Michael thought of Emma, of all the times she'd told him to follow, his heart, of how helping others had kept him going when he had nothing else. "I'm still the guy who lived under bridges," he said softly. "And I'm still the woman who needed your help in the rain." Eleanor touched his cheek. "Maybe we both need to stop letting other people define who we are." The garage lights cast long shadows as day faded to evening. Somewhere above them, the corporate world continued its endless cycle of meetings and decisions. But down here, among the machines they both understood so well, two people faced a choice between safety and authenticity. Michael reached into his pocket, pulled out his family photo. Emma's smile seemed especially bright in the dim light. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. "She always said the best people were the ones who saw you for who you really were, not what you looked like or what you owned." Eleanor looked at the photo, then at the torn resignation letter at their feet. "Smart girl," she said softly. "Wonder where she got that from." The choice still loomed, but somehow it felt different now. Maybe, Michael thought, the hardest paths were sometimes the most worth taking. Maybe sometimes you had to risk everything to keep what mattered most. He picked up the torn pieces of his resignation letter. "Got any tape?" Eleanor smiled. "Planning to fix something broken?" "No," he said, letting the pieces fall. "Planning to build something new instead." The story broke wide open on a Tuesday morning. It started with a blog post from Maria, the coffee shop owner, who had often helped Michael during his homeless days. The man behind the headlines, "What the media isn't telling you about Michael Foster," went viral within hours. "He fixed my ancient espresso machine when I couldn't afford a replacement," she wrote. "Wouldn't take payment, just a cup of coffee. Said everyone deserves a hot drink on a cold morning. That machine still runs perfectly 3 years later. But more importantly, his kindness kept my small business alive." Eleanor found Michael in the lab, surrounded by his team. They were all reading the growing collection of stories on their tablets and phones. "Have you seen this?" David Chen asked, holding up his phone. "My cousin's mechanic shop just posted about you. Says you helped him diagnose complex problems for free during your homeless period. Taught him everything he knows about European engines." More stories flooded in. A local women's shelter posted about Michael fixing their delivery van monthly. A church group shared how he'd taught basic car maintenance to people trying to get back on their feet. A homeless advocacy organization detailed his volunteer work teaching job skills to others in the shelter. "It's like an underground network," Thomas marveled, scrolling through his tablet. "All these people you helped, they've just been waiting for a chance to speak up." Michael stood at his workbench, Emma's photo propped against the vintage radio. "They were all just people who needed help," he said quietly, "like I did." Eleanor watched the stories multiply. Each one revealed another facet of the man she'd met in the rain. The brilliant engineer who never lost his desire to help others. The grieving father who channeled his pain into service. "Ms. Shaw," Janet Chen from HR appeared in the doorway. "You need to see this." The main lobby of Shaw Technologies had become a gathering point. People were showing up with their cars, asking for Michael. Not for free repairs this time, but to tell their stories. A news crew interviewed a young woman whose car Michael had fixed when she was rushing her sick mother to the hospital. "He didn't just fix my car," she told the camera, tears in her eyes. "He gave me hope when I needed it most. Showed me that kindness still exists in this world." More reporters arrived, but the story was shifting. Instead of scandal, they found humanity. Instead of controversy, they discovered community. "Your father would have loved this," Thomas said to Eleanor as they watched from above. "Remember how he always said technology should serve people, not the other way around?" Eleanor nodded, thinking of her father's garage, of Sunday drives in the Mercedes. He understood that business was about more than profit. It was about making life better for real people. The elevator dinged, and Jerry from the shelter stepped out carrying a thick folder. "Michael around. Got something he needs to see." In the lab, Jerry spread out letters on Michael's workbench, dozens of them, all from people at the shelter. Stories of how Michael had helped them maintain their cars, their dignity, their hope. Board wants evidence of character? Jerry grinned. Here's a novel's worth. Michael read letter after letter, each one bringing back memories. The veteran whose truck needed constant maintenance to keep his delivery job. The single mom whose car was her lifeline to work. The teenager saving for college by working night shifts, needing reliable transportation. I never kept track, he said, touching the letters gently. They were just people who needed help. That's exactly why they remember you, Eleanor said, joining them at the workbench. You saw them as people, not problems, just like you saw me that morning in the rain. Outside, the crowd in the lobby had grown. News helicopters circled the building, but they weren't chasing scandal anymore. They were documenting something rarer, a story about genuine human connection in a world that often seemed to have forgotten its importance. You know what Emma would say about all this? Michael picked up her photo, showed it to Eleanor. She'd say sometimes the best engines aren't in cars. They're in the hearts of people who keep going, keep helping, keep believing in each other. Eleanor took his hand, not caring who saw. Smart girl, she said softly, just like her father. The Shaw Technologies boardroom felt different this morning. Through its floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see the crowd still gathered below, their stories now playing on every major news network. Michael stood at the head of the long table, his weathered toolbox placed deliberately beside the sleek presentation materials. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, he began, you've all read the headlines. You've seen the stock fluctuations. Now I'd like to show you something else. He opened his toolbox, removed a simple notebook filled with hand-drawn designs. This is the future of Shaw Technologies' community engagement program. Reynolds scoffed from his seat. We're here to discuss damage control, not... No, James, Eleanor interrupted from her position at the other end of the table. We're here to discuss opportunity. Michael nodded, activating the presentation screen. Every person who's come forward with a story about me has something in common. They needed help maintaining the machines their lives depend on. Their cars, their work, equipment, their means of survival. The screen filled with his designs, mobile repair units, training programs, community workshops. Each sketch was detailed, practical, born from years of hands-on experience. Shaw Technologies leads the world in autonomous vehicles and advanced engineering. But what about the millions of people who can't afford new cars, who depend on aging machines to get to work, to medical appointments, to survive? He changed the slide to show cost projections. A community outreach division, combining our advanced technology with practical assistance, training programs for unemployed workers, mobile diagnostic units for underserved areas, real help for real people. The board members leaned forward, studying the numbers. Michael had done his homework. The program would be profitable while genuinely serving communities in need. This isn't just charity, he continued. It's strategic investment in our future workforce. Every person we help today is a potential customer, employee, or innovator tomorrow. An older board member spoke up. This reminds me of how Shaw Technologies began, when Henry Shaw would repair computers for anyone who needed help, regardless of their ability to pay. Eleanor smiled, thinking of her father, because he understood that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. Reynolds wasn't finished. It's a touching sentiment, but the shareholders are already responding. Thomas entered with fresh reports. Social media engagement up 500%. Stock price climbing. 3 major investment firms have called about increasing their positions, specifically citing corporate responsibility and community engagement. Michael opened his toolbox again, this time removing letters from the shelter. Every person who wrote these letters represents thousands more, who need what we can offer. Not just technology, but hope. Not just innovation, but opportunity. He turned to the board. You hired me for my engineering expertise, but everything I know about innovation I learned from helping people who had nowhere else to turn. Every patent I hold came from solving real problems for real people." Eleanor stood, moving to join him at the head of the table. "My father built this company on the belief that technology should improve lives, not just profit margins. Michael's proposal doesn't just honor that legacy, it extends it into the future." The boardroom fell silent as members studied the proposals, the letters, the news coverage still playing on muted screens around them. Finally, the board chairman spoke. "Mr. Foster, when you first came to us, many had doubts, but your department's innovations speak for themselves. And now," he gestured to the windows, where the crowd continued to grow, "now you've shown us something equally valuable, the power of genuine human connection in a technological world." Reynolds started to object, but the chairman held up his hand. "I believe we should put it to a vote. All in favor of establishing the Shaw Technologies Community Innovation Division under Mr. Foster's leadership?" Hands rose around the table. Reynolds looked around, realized he was outnumbered, and slowly raised his own hand. "Unanimous," the chairman announced. "Mr. Foster, Ms. Shaw, make it happen." As the board members filed out, Michael and Eleanor stood at the window watching the crowd below. News crews interviewed people sharing stories of broken machines fixed, of help given freely, of dignity preserved through simple acts of kindness. "You know," Eleanor said softly, "when my car broke down that morning, I thought I was just getting a repair." Michael smiled, thinking of Emma's photo in his toolbox, "and I thought I was just helping another stranded driver. Funny how life works sometimes. Emma used to say that broken things lead you to where you need to be." He touched the window gently. "I never understood what she meant until now." Below them, the crowd had begun to cheer as the news of the board's decision spread. A new chapter was beginning, not just for them, but for everyone who had ever needed help fixing what was broken in their lives. That evening, Eleanor sat alone in her penthouse, her father's journal open in her lap. She'd found it while searching for old company documents, tucked away in his desk drawer. The entry she kept returning to was dated just months before his death. "Watched Eleanor in the boardroom today. She's everything I hoped she'd be as CEO, brilliant, decisive, respected. But when she worked on the Mercedes this weekend, I saw something I haven't seen in years, my little girl's smile, the one she had before success became a cage, before she started measuring her worth in stock prices and board votes." The elevator chimed softly. Only 2 people had access to her private floor, Thomas and— "I thought I'd find you here," Michael said, stepping into the living room. He carried his toolbox and a familiar paper bag from Maria's coffee shop. "Cinnamon rolls?" Eleanor asked, managing a small smile. "Some traditions are worth keeping." He set them down, noticed the journal. "What's that?" "Dad's private thoughts." She traced the handwritten words. "He worried about me, about what I'd sacrificed to be what everyone expected." Michael sat beside her, close enough to offer comfort but giving her space to process. "What did you want to be before expectations got in the way?" "Happy." The simplicity of the answer surprised them both. "I loved the company, the work, the challenges. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be anything else." "Until a broken car forced you to stop," Michael said softly. Eleanor closed the journal. "Until a man with a toolbox reminded me that sometimes the most valuable things can't be measured in quarterly reports." Michael reached for his toolbox, opened it carefully. Inside, nestled among the tools, was a small leather-bound book. "Emma's diary," he explained. "I found it after everything. Never had the courage to read it until recently." He opened to a marked page, handed it to Eleanor. The handwriting was careful, precise despite the writer's youth. "Dad fixed Mrs. Johnson's car today. She couldn't pay, but he did it anyway. Said sometimes you have to fix what's broken, even if there's no reward. But he's wrong about the reward part. I saw his face when her car started. That's what happiness looks like. Not money or fancy things, but knowing you made life better for someone else. Eleanor read the words again, feeling their weight. She understood, didn't she? Even at 12. Better than I did. Michael took out his family photo, looked at it in the city lights streaming through the windows. I spent years after losing her trying to fix everything I could, thinking it would somehow fill the hole she left. Never realized I was actually following her example. By helping others heal, Eleanor said, understanding dawning. By being the light she saw in you. They sat in comfortable silence, the city humming below them. Two people who had found each other through a broken car and discovered they were both looking for the same thing, authenticity in a world of facades. I've been thinking, Eleanor said finally, about what happens next. The community innovation. Division will change lives, but... She hesitated, then continued, but I don't want to just fund it. I want to be part of it, really part of it. Michael looked at her curiously. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time for Shaw Technologies to have two CEOs, one for the corporate side, one for community innovation. She met his eyes. Partners. In every sense. The weight of her words hung between them. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about two people who had found something rare, someone who saw them for who they really were, not what life had made them become. Emma would have loved that idea, Michael said softly. A company that fixes both machines and lives. Dad, too. Eleanor touched his hand. He always said the best partnerships are built on shared values, not shared bank accounts. Michael entwined his fingers with hers, remembering that first morning in the rain, how a simple act of kindness had led to this moment, this possibility of something genuine and deep and real. You know, he said, Emma wrote something else in her diary, about how some things break, so better things can be built in their place. Eleanor leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Smart girl, like her father's new partner. Michael smiled, pulling her closer. Outside, the city sparkled with possibility. Tomorrow would bring challenges, questions, obstacles to overcome. But tonight was for recognizing that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as broken parts, waiting to be fixed by the right hands, the right heart, at exactly the right moment. The press conference was Eleanor's idea. If we're going to change the company, she'd said, let's do it our way. No leaks, no speculation, just the truth. They stood together in the Shaw Technologies lobby, where just weeks ago a crowd had gathered to share stories of Michael's kindness. Now, reporters filled the space, cameras ready, while Thomas distributed press packets containing their announcement. Shaw Technologies was founded on a simple principle, Eleanor began, her voice clear and confident. That technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. Today, we're recommitting to that vision in a bold, new way. She gestured to Michael, who stepped forward. Gone was the man who'd once slept under bridges. In his place stood a leader who had never lost his humanity, despite life's hardest blows. The Community Innovation Division isn't just another corporate initiative, he said. It's a recognition that true progress must include everyone. Each mobile repair unit we deploy, each training program we establish, each community workshop we open, these are investments in human potential. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Shaw, sources say you're planning to share CEO responsibilities with Mr. Foster. Isn't this an unprecedented move for a company of Shaw's size? Eleanor smiled. Unprecedented, perhaps, but so was my father's decision to repair computers for free when he started this company. So was Michael's choice to help others even when he had nothing himself. Innovation isn't just about technology, it's about having the courage to do things differently. Mr. Foster, another reporter called, how do you respond to critics who say your relationship with Ms. Shaw influenced this decision? Michael glanced at Eleanor, then addressed the crowd. When I was homeless, I learned something valuable. Real worth isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. Eleanor Shaw saw that worth in me, just as I saw in her someone who understood. That business should be about more than profit. He reached into his pocket, pulled out Emma's diary. My daughter once wrote that true happiness comes from making life better for others. Shaw Technology's new direction isn't about a relationship between two people. It's about a relationship with the community that supported us both. The announcement continued with specific details. Mobile repair units, staffed by trained technicians, many hired from homeless shelters and rehabilitation programs. Community workshops where people could learn basic maintenance skills, partnerships with local businesses to provide job training and employment opportunities. But perhaps most importantly, Eleanor concluded, we're changing how success is. Measured at Shaw Technologies, profit margins will always matter, but so will the number of lives we improve, the communities we strengthen, the hope we restore. As if on cue, the lobby doors opened. Maria from the coffee shop entered, followed by Jerry from the shelter and dozens of others whose lives Michael had touched. Each carried a tool, a part, or a story of how one person's kindness had changed their world. These are our new board advisors, Eleanor announced. Real people who understand real needs, because you can't innovate solutions for communities you don't understand. The press conference shifted into something else entirely, a celebration of connection, of possibility, of what business could be when humanity drove innovation instead of the other way around. Later, in Eleanor's office, they watched the coverage together. The headlines were different this time. Shaw Technologies revolutionizes corporate responsibility. From homeless to hero, a new vision of business leadership. Technology giant returns to human-centered roots. Well, Michael said, I guess there's no going back now. Eleanor took his hand. Would you want to? He thought of Emma's words, about happiness, of all the twists and turns that had led him here. No, he said softly. Some paths are meant to be followed, no matter how unexpected they seem. Thomas knocked and entered, carrying more press coverage. The stock is up 15 points, he reported, and you might want to see this. He handed them a tablet open to social media. Fix What's Broken was trending worldwide, with people sharing stories of help given and received, of small kindnesses that changed lives, of hope restored through simple acts of human connection. Emma would have loved this, Michael said, reading the stories, a whole movement built on helping others. She helped start it, Eleanor reminded him. Through you. Through every person you helped when you had nothing but a toolbox and a kind heart. Outside her window, the city was changing as evening fell. But now they saw it differently, not as a landscape of buildings and profits, but as a community of people whose lives could be improved. One fixed machine, one act of kindness. At a time, 1 year later, Michael stood in the rain again. But this time, he wasn't alone, and the rain fell on the grand opening of the first Shaw Technologies Community Innovation Center, housed in what had once been Foster's European Auto. Eleanor stood beside him, holding an umbrella over them both as they watched families stream into the renovated building. The old shop signs had been restored, now hanging proudly alongside the Shaw Technologies logo. Through the windows, they could see training classes in progress, workbenches filled with people learning and teaching. Look, Eleanor pointed. Jerry from the shelter was leading a basic car maintenance workshop, showing a group of eager students how to change oil and check tire pressure. At another station, Maria had set up a coffee bar, offering free drinks to anyone taking classes. Emma would have loved this, Michael said softly, touching the building's brick wall. Her old homework spot is now a classroom. The center had become everything they'd envisioned, and more. During the day, it offered free repairs to those who couldn't afford them, along with training programs for people seeking new skills. In the evenings, it hosted classes ranging from basic maintenance to advanced engineering, taught by professionals and former students alike. Mr. Foster, a young woman hurried through the rain to reach them. Michael recognized her as one of their first students, a former shelter resident who now worked as a certified mechanic. "We just got another donation of tools from the auto parts store, and 3 more companies want to sponsor apprenticeships." Inside, the walls were lined with before and after photos, not just of repaired vehicles, but of transformed lives, people who had gone from seeking help to providing it, from learning to teaching, from hopeless to hopeful. Thomas appeared with their schedule. "The other centers are ready for virtual connection. 15 locations, all opening simultaneously. Across the city, and now the country, similar centers were opening. Each one a combination of repair shop, training facility, and community hub. Each one a testament to the idea that fixing what's broken isn't just about machines." Eleanor squeezed Michael's hand as they headed inside. The old shop floor had been modernized, but maintained its character. His original toolbox, now retired, sat in a place of honor near the entrance, alongside Emma's diary and a photo of her smiling face. "Ready?" Eleanor asked as they prepared to address the gathered crowd. Michael looked around at what they'd built together. At Jerry teaching his class, at Maria serving coffee, at former shelter residents now wearing instructor badges, at the mix of corporate executives and community members, all gathered to celebrate something that had started with a broken car in the rain. "You know," he said, "Emma wrote something else in her diary, about how sometimes the biggest fixes start with the smallest repairs." Eleanor smiled, remembering their first meeting. "Smart girl. Wonder where she got that from." They stepped up to the podium together, no longer CEO and former homeless man, but partners in every sense. The crowd quieted, cameras rolled, and Michael began to speak. "1 year ago, a broken car brought 2 people together. Today, we're here to celebrate not just the opening of this center, but the power of human connection. The belief that everyone deserves a chance to fix what's broken in their lives." Eleanor continued, "Shaw Technologies was founded on the principle that technology should serve humanity. Today, we're honoring that legacy by combining innovation with compassion, profit with purpose." As they spoke, more people arrived despite the rain. Former customers from Michael's old shop, people he'd helped during his homeless years. Shaw Technologies employees who'd been transformed by his leadership, all coming together to support a vision of business that put humanity first. The rain eased as they cut the ribbon, and a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds. It caught the chrome of a familiar Mercedes parked outside, the same car that had brought them together, now used to teach students about classic engine repair. Later, after the crowds had thinned, Michael and Eleanor stood in what had once been his office. Now it was a classroom, but some things remained the same: the view of the street, the smell of coffee and motor oil, the sense of purpose in the air. "We've come full circle," Eleanor said, looking out at the rain-washed street. Michael pulled her close, thinking of all the twists and turns that had led them here. "Not a circle," he corrected gently. "A new path, one we're building together." Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, people learned and taught, fixed and rebuilt, hoped and grew. And somewhere, Michael liked to think, Emma was smiling, watching her father help build a world where broken things led to beautiful beginnings, where second chances created lasting change, and where love proved stronger than any division money could create. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the world fresh and new, just as it had that morning, 1 year ago, when a homeless man with a toolbox and a billionaire with a broken car discovered that sometimes the things most in need of repair aren't the ones made of metal and wire, but the connections between human hearts.